Professor Rebecca Willis from Lancaster University, and I think Rebecca's going to pick up on an issue that we've perhaps touched on a little already in this morning's session, but focus a little bit more fully on engagement governance, and particular citizens' engagement in the climate emergency. So over to you, Rebecca.
So yeah, thank you. As Gill said, I'm going to talk about the theme of citizen engagement, which has cropped up in the discussions a bit already. So I'll pick up on some of those themes, but I'll do a talk in two parts. The first part, I'll argue that we've been neglecting citizen engagement, and we really need to focus much more attention on it. And in the second part, I'll look at one way of doing that, an example of citizen engagement in action, which is Climate Assembly UK, which was a citizens' assembly established by the UK Parliament. So have we been neglecting citizen engagement? Well, James Lovelock, who some of you will know, he's a veteran earth scientist, and a little while ago, he expressed his deep frustration with our collective inability to tackle climate change and said, it may be an issue as serious as war. We may need to put democracy on hold for a while. And Lovelock was very explicit in saying this. But I think he articulated in very stark terms something that I think that many in the climate community actually feel, that democracy somehow gets in the way of climate action, and that it should be experts in the driving seat. I think this call for expert-led decisions is something that you see implicitly but constantly. So all the new reports and research that come out day after day, saying what needs to be done. So, you know, from the obvious and everyday, like the shift to renewables, to the really speculative and as yet unproven, like carbon removal technologies. There's absolutely no short of experts offering solutions, and it's often phrased in terms of, you know, blueprints and roadmaps. And yet, I see much less attention paid to what I see as the crucial question of how, as a human society, we should debate these questions, how we should agree and carry out the plans to tackle climate change. And I don't think that's something that can be done just by experts. So you might think this discussion job, if you like, is the job of government, both national and local. But even democratically elected governments have been pretty reluctant to actually talk to people and have a dialogue about what needs to happen. So I think so far the dominant approach taken by national government, less so by local government, but definitely by national government, has been what I've come to think of as climate policy by stealth, which is focusing on those things like decarbonisation of the power sector and industry that can be done, they hope, without people noticing, ways that, you know, that they can sort of get away with. And that at the very best, people sort of give their passive support. They don't notice what's being done on their behalf. So they've prioritised things that involve as little change to people's lives as possible, and they hope that people won't notice or won't care. I think this is really problematic. Partly from a practical point of view, because as the Committee on Climate Change has made clear time and time again, we can't get to net zero without people noticing the changes ahead, as we all know, in cities, to transport, land use, some of the energy solutions. They need people to engage. And you know, we may be experts in the policy design, but people are experts in their own lives. And so if we listen to people and involve them in the changes, we will get better, more robust outcomes. There's also a moral case, of course, because scientists can tell us the science, economists can do their modelling, but what actually gives experts the right to say that that their approach should be the only path through? What gives them the right to say that that citizens don't have a role in deciding? Why are we making this assumption that citizens and voters need to be bypassed? And can we not instead assume that if people are given access to the evidence, if they're given responsibility and respect and a stake in the process, most people would support action to protect the planet that sustains their life. And this is actually quite a hard case to make at the moment, because, I mean, obviously we've just seen 70 million Americans voting for a leader who, you know, thankfully wasn't successful, but who was in President Trump, who was undoing climate policy left, right, and centre. But I would say that this comes down to this issue of giving people evidence, responsibility, and a stake. The problems that we have, like 70 million people voting for a climate denier, are down to deficiencies in the democratic system and really problematic power relations. So if we actually start looking at the working of democracy, we can hopefully get the kinds of outcomes that work better for citizens and work better for the climate. So one small example of what this could look like is Climate Assembly UK. And to introduce it, I'm going to actually let the participants themselves introduce it. I'll share my screen and show you a 2-minute video.
Dear resident, dear resident, you could be one of over 100 people selected to take part in a UK-wide citizens' assembly on how should the UK tackle climate change. It's an interesting proposition. I'm Amanda from Kent, and I'm 27. So this weekend is going to be about introducing you to climate change in a thorough way.
It was really exciting to be told I was selected. It just seemed like a very rare opportunity.
Initially, I wasn't sure what it would be like, because I hadn't done anything like that before.
Perfectly honest with you, I didn't have a clue what zero carbon was.
I didn't know enough about climate change. I was open to information.
There were so many different perspectives and opinions, so many people of different ethnicity, different ages.
It was so nice to see, you know, the representation of the UK.
The fact that you've given up time to come here and take this seriously is of the greatest importance.
It felt like the community kind of working together towards a problem that the whole world needs to face.
Obviously, at the moment, we're all on lockdown.
Moving on to 3 internet weekends was quite good. We were still investigating things on our own. I'm not saying we're experts now, but we all have opinions.
Everybody's had a taste of this cleaner air. Surely most people would want that for their children and their grandchildren.
Well, if we treat climate change the same way as we're treating coronavirus, then we can do it. We all want the government to take heed of our recommendations.
They need to act on it, but also to act on it fast. So it's not about saying, okay, we just keep deliberating over it over the next 1 year, 2 years.
They are by law bound to try to get to this target.
It's got to be done in a fair, positive way.
So if we don't act now, we're just going to run out of time and there won't be a future for any of us.
And if we can show that we can do it, then perhaps others will follow. I think somebody has to be a leader.
So that just gives you a flavour of what it was like to be involved in that process. And I mean, it was one of the most remarkable and amazing things I've had the pleasure to be involved in my career. It was I know it's an overused word, but it was genuinely inspirational. So the Climate Assembly was a gathering of 108 citizens, and they were selected to be representative of the UK as a whole in terms of demographics and also in terms of attitude to climate change, which was really important. They heard evidence on climate, they deliberated on possible solutions, and they published their recommendations to Parliament in September last year. I'm not going to run through the recommendations because this is their work. It's an old-fashioned phone book it's worth of recommendations in total. But when it was launched, you might have seen the headlines coming, and they tend to focus on sort of eye-catching specific recommendations like a frequent flyer levy and banning cars from town centres and so on. But they weren't the main findings for me. There's some of the core themes that came up time and time again in the discussions and the recommendations were firstly wanting this information, education and dialogue. So wanting this sort of explicit conversation about climate change, which, as I said in the first half of this talk, I think has been severely lacking. There was a big focus on fairness, fairness between regions, across incomes and different demographics, and fairness in terms of providing enough choice for people to be able to find the path that suits them best. Understandably, a lot of focus on co-benefits, how we could have a climate strategy that works for local high streets, for health and the economy and so on. And then time and time again, this request for strong leadership from government and over a long term and actually a cross-party approach to climate change came up pretty strongly. So they were just some of the themes that came up, but I think what this experiment left me thinking, and this has actually been confirmed by other processes that I've seen as well, is that if you do give people the time and the respect and the information, they come up with a really sensible set of recommendations. And you see the ripple effect as well. So Sue, who you saw in that film, since she's been part of Climate Assembly, she's bought an electric vehicle secondhand, which is brilliant, but she's also become a parish councillor because she started to see the value of this kind of engagement. So as well as Climate Assembly UK, there have been a lot of processes at the local level. In fact, Leeds Citizens Jury, along with Oxford and Camden, actually predated Climate Assembly UK. There's been the National Assembly in France and some others, some of whom I've been advising. I've got a particular eye on Washington State in the US at the moment. That's top left, as they always told me, where Seattle is, not Washington DC. So Washington started off as a way of sort of providing an alternative view to the federal government, and that's underway now. So it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves. And of course, Scotland is running their own climate assembly at the moment. So, I mean, I want to make it clear that citizen engagement doesn't start and end with climate assemblies. They are not a panacea. The biggest issue is obviously the one that we're looking at now, how these findings and recommendations are implemented. And that's particularly an issue when some of the findings from the citizens sort of knock into either the sort of harsh realities of how governance works, or some of the sort of entrenched power relations that dominate politics. And so it's very tempting for governments to cherry pick recommendations from citizens' assemblies, and that whole process of implementation is fraught, to say the least. But it does show that you get better, more popular decisions when you tap into people's knowledge and experience. And it does show that you can construct a climate strategy which both engages and motivates, which creates a kind of virtuous circle, allowing governments, whether that be at the city level, the state level or national level, that allows governments to move that much further. And what's been really interesting for me is seeing the perspective of the Committee on Climate Change shift. So Chris Stark, the chief exec, was one of the expert leads alongside me. And I mean, you know, the Committee on Climate Change, they are kind of, you know, it's a bunch of policy wonks. That's what they do very, very well. They're all about the constructing the models and everything. And through being involved in Climate Assembly UK, they not only noticed that the 108 citizens with access to expert knowledge basically got to the same place as the CCC in terms of recommendations to government. But they also saw the value of this kind of input to the policy process. And I'm now talking to the Committee on Climate Change and working with them on how they can embed deliberative research into their strategy as a committee. My work following the Climate Assembly has been about how you build deliberation into climate policy decisions on an ongoing basis. So not just the sort of big bang of a citizens' assembly, but how you can improve the democratic process, improve the way that decision making works by working with citizens to hold government to account, but also to give their lived experience, to actually give you the information you need, the views you need to make policies work better. So, I mean, just going back to where I started with James Lovelock and his, provocative critique about democracy, I think the bottom line is this, that to tackle climate change, you need more democracy and better democracy, not less. And this has been an absolute whistle-stop tour, both through Climate Assembly and through this need for citizen engagement altogether. But if I've whetted your appetite, the inevitable book plug, there is a book on this which I published last year, which developed some of those findings a bit more. So I'd be really interested to hear what other people's experiences of these processes are and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. That's really interesting, and again, a very passionate argument and about democratising this whole issue, which I think is a really important point, and something I'm sure we'll get some questions on. So thank you ever so much, Rebecca. I loved seeing the video as well, which even just that short snippet seemed very inspirational. So thank you very much for sharing that.